What do you wish for? What do you wish for? When you blow out the candles on your birthday cake, are you wishing for health and happiness? Do you wish for peace every time you hear the news of another heinous act of violence? Do you wish that your friends and your family would perhaps pick a different restaurant to go to, one that doesn't quite mess up your order so frequently? And do you wish that the people packed in next to you on the subway in the morning had edited their choice of cologne both in terms of quantity and quality? Wishing is a fundamental act of our human existence as we follow our curiosity, explore our interests, and desire a good and comfortable life for ourselves and for those whom we love. So it's no wonder in our text today that we find people engaging in this time-honored act of wishing. This time it's the Greeks who have come a long distance to worship at the festival, and while they are there, they wish to see Jesus. Now they approach Philip because perhaps he brandishes a Greek name and they know he's from an area that has a sizable population of Gentiles. And they tell him of their wish. Philip, in turn, rushes off to discuss this request with Andrew, thereby demonstrating that whenever the work of God is involved, it probably requires some sort of committee. That's a joke. They bring the wish of the Greeks to Jesus, and he responds to the request in a most peculiar way. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified, he says, and this is quite odd. Because up to this point, Jesus had spent much of his time telling folks that his appointed time had not yet come. In John chapter 2, verse 4, Jesus tells his mother at the wedding of Cana that his hour had not yet come, even though she was worried sick about the lack of libations at the wedding. In John chapter 7, verse 6, Jesus tells his brothers that his time has not yet come, despite their pleas that he make a grand entrance at the Festival of Tabernacles. In John 7, verse 30, Jesus passes through a hostile crowd, unharmed because his time has not yet come. And again, in John 8:20, he evades the wrath of another disgruntled group because, you guessed it, his time had not yet come. So why all of a sudden, when the Greeks show up asking for Jesus, does he say that this is the hour? This is my hour. It has come. In his book, Tattoos on the Heart, Father Greg Boyle, a Jesuit priest and founder of Homeboy Industries, tells the story of his early days at the Dolores Mission Station in Los Angeles. The Dolores Mission Station was a church, and under the guidance and direction of both laity and Father Boyle, they began opening themselves up to the neighborhood. And before long, gang members would gather by the bell tower waiting for the ministries to begin. Homeless men and women would fill the parking lot waiting to be fed. And all day long, countless groups of people would stream in and out of the building for AA, NA, and ESL classes. Now one day, a man in a very nice car drove up by the church. And he saw Father Boyle and he said, I grew up around these parts. I grew up here in these projects. And this church, it meant so much to me. He went on to tell Father Boyle of the deep impact that this church had had on his life in the more respectable days. Disgusted at the groups of people just hanging out around the church, he shook his head and said, it's sad. This used to be a church. Father Boyle thought about that before responding, most people around here think it's finally a church. You see, the Dolores Mission Church found its real identity. It found its truth when the missing parts, that were crucial to its existence finally showed up. And so it is with the advent of the Greeks in the story, these Gentiles, these missing parts of Jesus' ministry, that his identity, his purpose, and his truth was ready to be revealed to his followers. And what a hard truth it is. If you love your life, you will lose it. But if you hate your life in this world, you will keep it. If you want to serve me, you must follow me. And if you want something to really bear fruit, you have to be okay with the idea of death. Without missing a beat, Jesus launches into an indication, as John puts it, of the kind of death that he was to die. A death laden with the promises of resurrection and the absolute absurdity of ascension. A type of death that all of us in some way must mimic if we are truly to follow Jesus and be where he is. Now, many of us have social media accounts, and we use these accounts as a means of keeping track of all the events in the lives of our friend and our family. I like to joke with my sister that if she really wants me to remember the birthdays of my niece and nephew, she needs to get them Facebook accounts. Now, this is despite the fact that they're really not old enough for such things yet, and I'm not sure that would even be a great idea, but that's just a minor detail. Most of us are quite content to learn about events going on in other people's lives through things like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. Pastor Amy is a prodigious user of social media, one of the best in terms of clergy as I've seen. It's one of the reasons I was so excited to work with her, a pastor who knows how to use Facebook. Now that's a very wonderful thing. And you know, it's okay. Finding out through Facebook that a coworker is expecting a baby, fine. Finding out through Facebook that your daughter is expecting a baby, not fine. Learning through Twitter that a distant cousin in Utah has purchased an automobile, sure. Finding out through Twitter that your spouse just purchased an automobile? Probably not okay. The disciples feel as if Jesus has just blatantly ignored any rules of etiquette when it comes to sharing big news. The time for the Son of Man to be glorified has come, Jesus. That's great. But didn't you want to wait for that moment to come? And didn't you want to wait to tell us about that moment when these Greeks aren't around? When it's just us, you know, your chosen followers, your inside group, the people that you have had following you around for all of this time? Reinhold Niebuhr once said, "It's not easy to speak the truth in love without losing a part of the truth. And therefore, one ought not to be too critical of those who put their emphasis on truth rather than on love." It would be quite understandable if Jesus' disciples at this point in the story were wishing that Jesus would indeed diminish part of his truth in exchange for what they might have considered to be a more loving statement and delivery. After all, even though the disciples had indeed wished for Jesus throughout the entire book of John to reveal himself to the world, he chose a moment populated with Gentiles to announce that the pregnancy of his purpose was coming to fruition, and the birth of something new and exciting was at the doorstep of delivery. The same Jesus who 10 chapters earlier was turning over tables in the temple is about to flip over Philip and Andrew's understanding of what it means to be disciples. The way in which Jesus communicates his message underscores this truth. It's time for the old way of doing things to fall away and die. There's a new way of doing things, and the fact that those with whom you are in conflict are now treated as close confidants, well, that's just a taste of what's to come. If you want to follow me, Philip and Andrew, you better polish up on your Greek, because guess who's coming to dinner? One of my favorite novels is Saint Maybe by Anne Tyler. And in this book, Ms. Tyler tells the story of a young Ian Bedloe, a young man who drops out of college in order to assume responsibility for his deceased brother's children. Now, upon hearing his decision to drop out of school and assume parenting responsibilities, and let me just share with you, Ian chooses to do this in person, not through Facebook, which is good, right? Well, upon hearing this news, Ian's parents hit the roof, especially when they find out that his decision is in large part informed by his participation in a storefront church that he had been attending. "Of course we have nothing against religion," his mother exclaims. "We raised all of you children to be Christians, but our church never asked us to abandon our entire way of life." Ian responds, "Well, maybe it should have. If this church, or any church, is doing its job well, it will accompany you to a Jesus who will say that some things are going to have to fall away and die in what will seem like an abandonment of a particular or perhaps an entire way of life. An unwillingness to forgive and reconcile with brothers and sisters who sit around us in pews, that's got to die. Living by an ethic of scarcity, always worried that there's not enough or not enough room at the table, when God has called us into a kingdom of abundance, of graceful provision. That idea of scarcity, that's got to die. Clinging to clunky paradigms in the face of new challenges and circumstances wrought by changing communities and cultures, that's got to die. A tendency to succumb to silence, even though the blood of countless black individuals still cries out from the streets where it was shed, that's got to die. Settling for a church that still has way too many hang-ups over who you love or how much you make or what color your skin is, friends, that really has to die. If we truly wish to see Jesus and follow him during this season of Lent, we must be willing to let him lead us to where he is, to the places where he will be, to the kind of death that he will die. But maybe there's another way. Perhaps there's a method by which we can be followers of Jesus with all of this difficult talk about death and this silly conversation about resurrection. Maybe we can discover a path to discipleship that keeps intact our way of life. Perhaps, but something tells me that that's only wishful thinking. Thanks be to God.